Hi, I'm Rachel Stevens, and I am a research director with RedMonk, the developer-focused analyst firm. Essentially, that means that my job is to help do investigation and research into technology tool trends, particularly from the point of the view of the developer and practitioner. And one of the trends that has taken the development world by storm in 2025 is agentic IDEs, and specifically spec-driven development. And so there is no one better to talk with me than the lead developer of Kiro. So with me today, I have Al Harris, a principal engineer at AWS. Al, thank you so much for giving me some time to talk through some of these exciting trends.
Yeah, thank you. Really excited to be here, Rachel. I can talk about Kiro and specs all day. So, I think it'll be hard to keep this short.
It's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. So Kiro came into the world this summer and is going GA at reInvent. And I would just love to hear more about the process of getting this project off the ground, from getting it from instantiation to where it is today. Can you run us through what was that process like?
Yeah, definitely. At Amazon, we go through the PR fact process. We write kind of the press release before we start writing code in most cases. And so the PR FAQ for Kiro was written, I think, sometime early last year, early 24. I first found out about the project when I was actually out on paternity leave, got an email from my VP congratulating me on starting Kiro. I came back from leave and said, "Hey, what is Cairo?" And then we kind of hit the ground running from there.
I love this. Congratulations on both of your babies.
Exactly. Yeah. They're about the same age. So there was a lot of ambiguity early on. We knew we wanted to build a system that let developers take spec to code and code to spec using something along the line of natural language to specify the system you're building, and then to also be able to extract a module, a component, a service, whatever, back into natural language. And that was sort of the brief at the start. We did not know we wanted to build an IDE.
At the start, it wasn't for sure an IDE. It was just a developer tool.
Just a dev tool, exactly. Yeah. The goal was help developers build systems better using natural language. The IDE was the form factor we sort of landed on after going through a couple of prototypes.
And how long did it get from kind of like that initial PR FAQ to developing code to getting it out the door?
We went through a few months of prototyping phase. We built, I think, 3 or 4 different iterations of the system kind of from the ground up. In fact, I was just going through some of the old docs and prepping for this, and it was a little bit funny. You kind of forget about these things a year on, but we had 3 totally different ideas we were kicking out, looking at market competitors, image competitors, saying, hey, what are people doing that works? What are people doing that we don't like? But ultimately, what is the tool we want to build? The anecdote I kept using with the team, and I think it was actually a poor way to describe it, but at the time it was my best way of explaining what I wanted, was I felt maybe the first thing I should say is that I was sort of an LLM and Gen AI hater when I was put on this project. Pretty bearish on the technology. It's like, I'm not seeing the value. I've seen some of these kind of early tools, but I'm not realizing any benefit myself. But after integrating with these things and building sort of the first iteration of what we considered to be a spec, it was like, oh, this is rough, but there's really something kind of cool here. Like, this is obviously not a shippable product, but when I have my thumb on the scale and I can control how this system is going to work, I can actually achieve something I want to go build. And I had to be very specific, and I had a spec to describe how I wanted to build, for example, a RESTful CDK app. Super constrained problem set, but I was able to move very quickly on that. And that demo gave me a lot of confidence that there's definitely something we could do here. I think we prototyped for a few months. We had sort of a rough plan of where we wanted to go by November of last year. November to January, we got, I would say, our first sort of iteration of a semi-complete system put together. And then we had a demo video that went out January, early Jan of this year, that I think garnered a lot of attention from our own leadership, and people started taking us a little bit more seriously. I mean, we were a small team, and we still are a reasonably small team, but for those first 6 months, we were 3 to 5 people just kind of sitting in a closet iterating.
Oh, I saw the first demo of it in February of this year. I saw one of the early ones, but I also was going back through my notes for this, and one of my initial notes was spec is holy shit. I loved the markdown way of describing your intention.
Yeah.
Like, for me, it's always resonated as a general thought process.
We'll probably get there a little later in the conversation, but we initially didn't even have Markdown. Like, that was not the plan. We had this whole structured notebook, and it was like we built all this stuff and then looked at it and said, this doesn't work for everyone. Like, this is not a universal interface. We need to scrap this and start over. So yeah, definitely getting back to plain text every time.
I want to spend some time going through what those iterations look like. But before we dive off, because you've been actively building this for 14, 15 months, it sounds like,
Yep. Yeah.
um, which means that you were already in flight building this tool when kind of the concept of vibe coding, like that infamous Andrei Karpathy tweet about what it means to vibe code, that happened after you have started. MCP, it existed at the end of last year, but it didn't really take off into the world until early 2025. So that all kind of came into being as you were going to, like, tell me about the product development process in a world where everything is moving so fast and when you have to adapt to some of these like really significant and seismic changes in the entire landscape.
Yeah. I mean, there's no way to do it other than throwing out your preconceived notions every half year. I mean, products that people were really, really bullish on 6 months ago are not talked about today. You have to keep up. And I think, we're doing our best and hoping to maintain relevancy, but it's challenging. I think the goal has to be really small teams that can move quickly.
Mm-hmm.
There have been some interesting, I think, blog posts coming out from other DEs at Amazon, Joe Mag and Anthony Ligori, posting on sort of some of the things they've been doing with Gen AI, moving really quickly. But ultimately, we have a very small team of core people that really understand the system that we built, and they can move quickly. And even if we say, hey, we're going to scrap this whole thing that we just spent 3 weeks on, which was a lifetime at that point. I've built a lot of products at Amazon, by the way, and this is like by far the fastest paced thing I've ever worked on. It's absolutely wild. I'm not sure if it's been a week or 10 years. Like you mentioned, MCP existed last year in end of 2024, but it was something we talked about, like, oh, that's pretty cool. That's interesting. I think by Feb of this year, every VP I knew was talking about MCP. It's like, we have CEOs talking about it. It was a very weird shift to have what felt to me like a detail, an implementation detail of the system suddenly is at a very high level being
Yeah.
discussed. But ultimately, we didn't change the process much. We had to keep going back and saying, we are not happy with what we've built. We don't think this is it. The ecosystem has changed, and we need to be able to kind of scrap the old way of thinking that we had 6 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, whatever, and start over. And that'll kind of, I think, talk a little bit about spec change, but even just how what the product was changed over and over again.
Yeah.
Initially, for example, vibe coding, our agentic chat experience was completely separate from the spec experience. These were basically two unrelated features within the product suite, and those have kind of come back together over time. But that was kind of one of the big changes is, hey, we need, again, text is sort of this universal entry point. We need to make sure that all parts of these systems understand and can sort of ingress you to the other features. So if I'm doing inline editing, it can get me into spec development. Or if I'm doing spec dev, it can move me over to writing code in a specific file, things like that. And that's when things really started to feel better, I would say, which was quite close to launch when those things became cohesive.
You mentioned that there were many iterations of what it meant to kind of create a spec. How
Yeah.
do you define spec-driven development now? And
Yeah.
maybe compare and contrast it to vibe coding. Just I think that's a more common entry point for people.
Yeah, I would say personally, the way I keep defining spec-driven dev, and even people on the team might disagree with me on this, but it is a structured workflow with a specific set of artifacts that you generate and persist that will give you reliable and reproducible results. Each of those statements is doing quite a bit of heavy lifting, and sort of throughout the process of developing Kiro and shipping Kiro, those things have changed. But that is, I think, across the ecosystem, looking at what spec means to different companies and different people trying to build. This is not a novel goal, right? A lot of people are trying to do it right now. And I think we're all trying to figure out what the best way to do it is. But it is that I want a structured workflow. I want you to take me through some semblance of an SDLC. These things exist for reasons, right? We all went to Agile training a decade ago because it was the way to do things, and then XP and da-da-da. Now we're all going to be spec devs. There always has been sort of this STLC, and you have to adhere to something, I think, to get reproducible results across a large team. One person can do whatever they want and do it pretty well because you can hold that process in your head, but you need to formalize the process and then actually persist and share the artifacts, I think, in order to be successful as a scaling team.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
One thing I'd love to hear you talk about more. So we were talking about how Kiro can produce reproducible artifacts.
Mhm.
and some of the different ways that you can give Kiro direction. You can give it via steering, you can give it hooks, you can give it your actual spec, or you can prompt. Can you kind of talk about where somebody should do each? What exists for what?
Um, that is a good question, and that is a question we're still working on. We've built all these features, and we built them because we think they're useful.
Mm-hmm.
Even within the team, I had a 90-minute session with the whole team. We kind of sat down and said, "Hold on, we need to think about the way we're doing things." And ultimately, like we built, for example, steering was intended to be a way to provide additional context to the agent at different life cycles in sort of your development. So you would have sort of I forget what we call it, an always included steering doc for things like, this is how you run tests and builds in my system. Here's how I like to lay out the code. Here's how,
Can
I
I tell
prefer.
you what I always use steering for?
Yeah,
I
please.
I always make my agent talk like a pirate to me.
That's a good one.
It's my favorite one.
We were just talking about somebody on the team has theirs chat to them like a net runner. So it says
I'm gonna
choom
have
a
to try
lot.
that
I'm
one
not.
next.
Yeah. There's a lot of fun ones. These were the best way for us to burn tokens, I think, early on. But even for steering, an idea we were kicking around was, well, we don't have a good concept today of memory in Kiro. We
Mm-hmm.
certainly want it. We know it's a gap, but can we have the poor man's version of memory by having a steering doc that's manually included that has very extensive docs on, let's say, how to write integration tests, and then a
Mm-hmm.
short steering that's always included that's just a pointer to that thing, right? If you need to know more about writing integration tests, read this file. So even within the team, we're still trying to define those things, but ultimately, steering exists to help you build the context you want the agent to
Mm-hmm.
know about, either based on what you're doing right now or what you're doing all the time. Personally, when I'm doing development, I have an extension I distribute with the team called Luva, which I think is Portuguese for glove, but it was just a name that, Kiro suggested to me. Basically, it's the tool that I give our team to help them develop Kiro more efficiently. And that's something that, code quality sort of doesn't matter because I'm just going to ship this to 5 people to move fast. But in that case, every time I do anything with a spec, I think 19 specs in that, even though it's a fairly small code base. Each of those is a feature I've built. And then every time I run a spec task, we'll kind of figure out what failed, what didn't go well, how did we debug it, how did we build it, and I'll ask the system to go and update its steering files. So over time, it's gotten really efficient. It understands its own build process well. This is, of course, just a trite example, but ultimately, nothing's changed in the Gen AI world. You still have to go sharpen your tools. And that
Mm-hmm.
is using the steering. Our intern just shipped an improvement to hooks. So hooks have more support now. I'm hoping that is out by the time this video drops. I'm very optimistic. But so now you can do things like run commands at different life cycles. And that's useful for things like internally at Amazon, people use multi-package workspaces quite a bit when they develop, and understanding which I would say parts of your workspace are loaded is really useful. And so running like a workspace shell command is really helpful at the beginning of a coding session. So that's like an example of a very common ask we've gotten internally from Amazon builders. And then ultimately spec is going to be the way that you kind of say, we're going to go build a feature. We want to document it. We want to go through the process, et cetera.
So if I were going to shorthand what you just said, so like it would be so you're not having to write so much spec every time. Is that the right way to think of it, or not quite?
I think that's a good way to use it. I think of them as sort of orthogonal concerns. Spec is
Okay.
what I'm doing, and steering is how I'm doing it.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Help me just place Kiro inside the broader landscape. So we've spent a lot of time talking about spec-driven development. A lot of the tools out there have kind of adopted the vibe coding approach to things. Talk to me just how you view the landscape of your tool and all the tools around you.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the feature I still want to ship is the same feature I started on day one, and that is the ability for devs to go from spec to code or code to
Mm-hmm.
spec. My charter is to do that in the most efficient way possible. Shipping an IDE was sort of a necessary evil to do that, but we're also now exploring how we decouple sort of that process from the IDE surface. That's
Interesting.
not a short-term plan or even a goal right now, but that is one way we're thinking about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, natural given the direction the ecosystem's moving, right? People love Claude Code Web. I can tag a cursor in a GitHub issue and it just goes and works on it. Like that's kind of the dream boat. We want to find the right way to build spec in a way that you can iterate on it sort of asynchronously or with multiple people or whatever. But ultimately, like that only matters if we can do it in a high quality way. And that means we can continue to have some semblance of the software dev lifecycle that we think matters or that you think matters. TBD. We're looking at different entry points there because right now, requirement design task list is kind of heavyweight for everybody, even though we think they're high value artifacts.
Hmm.
And ultimately, we want to be best in class in the spec to code space. There are going to be people who are going to blow pants off us in the IDE space. We just don't have the org size for it. We don't have the experience. We want to help customers build code and ship solutions to problems. And I think that's always been the Amazon and AWS way, right? We're not necessarily a tooling company. We're a solving your problem company.
That actually takes me into one of the questions that I think is most intriguing about Kiro and kind of talking about that Amazon way is this product kind of broke a lot of the norms that in terms
Mhm.
of products that we see come out of Amazon and AWS. I think for me, most notably is that Kiro shipped as its own standalone brand rather than being under either the Amazon or AWS umbrella.
Mhm.
Talk to me just about what that looks like from the inside. Why did you make choices that maybe all these choices happened way above both of our pay grades? I don't know, but just what do you see from the inside?
Certainly these decisions were made well above my pay grade. I've never had a chance to influence, the CEO before, but this was an interesting one to be certain. Andy Jassy and Matt Garman want to position. This is ultimately totally their prerogative, and I have no skin in the fight. What I care about is that developers can use Kiro, and that means supporting social sign-on. And social sign-on sort of
That's another good one to highlight.
yes. But that inherently breaks a ton of like assumptions that everybody at AWS always has, which is you have an AWS account, you have a credit card on file, you have an address and a yada, yada, yada. That's so much friction. I don't know the number of clicks to create an account. It's a large number. Our edict was, I think, 2 clicks to be signed into Kiro, like a download and a start. I'm not sure if we hit that or not, but that was critical to us, right? Is to make sure that you as a standalone developer can use Kiro and ideally love Kiro. And, you know, my director went and figured out all the escalations we needed to do social sign-on and do all those things. And so my job is to make sure that when you use it, you're loving it. But that ultimately, I think, actually led to a lot of these decisions just because we broke the mold a lot from AWS.
Hmm.
In terms of how we operate, it's not fundamentally different than other teams at AWS. We are, I think, smaller, and we're trying really hard to sort of insulate a little bit more so we can move fast because we need to move fast in this space, kind of like we
Yeah,
said
space
earlier.
is
It's
moving quick.
moving.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we can't spend 6 months thinking about an idea. It has to be done in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So speaking of all the things you've got done, can you give us an update on what's launching at reInvent?
Oh yeah.
I
This
mean,
is
other than the tool at large, you're going GA, correct?
GA. I think is mostly it's for looks. Not much is functionally changing with the
Because you
GA.
really shipped a polished product up front.
Oh,
I
that's
think that's another part. I think that's another part of what was a mold breaker, though, is that it was not something that shipped on kind of a deadline driven shipping. It was when we are ready to ship this.
I mean, yeah, the I want to say the 2 to 3 weeks leading up to the launch, it was a daily review with my senior leadership, basically saying, "What did we get done yesterday? Do we love this yet? No. Let's go back and try again. See you in 24 hours." Like we did that kind of daily for quite a while, just about trying to kind of get the little things polished up. And I mean, if you've used it since then, it's not a perfect product. There's a ton of things we're not happy with
For
and a
sure.
ton of things we have to do. So that said, I know you had some preview build that you saw. It launched much better than that. Those last 3 weeks were critical to getting it polished. But I think coming into reInvent, we're launching a bunch of cool things. My buddy Jason just launched remote MCP. Peter's launching multi-workspace support. Everybody on the team's kind of shipping some feature. We're going to have more efficient summarization coming from Karthik. Raghav, who's a newish engineer on the team, added checkpointing. And so these are all things that are launching that are not like novel and huge features in and of themselves, but they're turning it into a complete and cohesive product and one that you can use just sort of all day. Also, we're shipping a way to share config across users. So this is going to be
Oh, nice.
bundles of some sort of registry for MCP, steering docs. Yeah, we want to be able to share these packages of, how do I integrate with X and Y external company really quickly and easily. I know we're doing a lot of work in the next few weeks to make enterprise onboarding easier. So yeah, it's a lot of little things, then a couple big things coming down the pipe. But ultimately, it's just really trying to get the product to a place that we feel like it's whole.
Gotcha. Now, I'm realizing that you probably have a lot of limits on what you can tell me in terms of outlying roadmap, but can you kind of just paint a picture on how you see the world of spec-driven development advancing in 2026?
I think that ultimately we need to solidify the processes that have been built. Right now, spec-driven development, even in Kiro, is still very much vibe coding with a structure. It's going to be putting analytic tools, neurosymbolic analysis. I think there's going to be a little bit of talk about this at reInvent, but using some of the scientists at Amazon to build non-LLM and sort of non-textual ways to represent the correctness of the solution that you're building with spec.
What I just heard is making it more deterministic. Is that accurate or no?
Yes, that's a great way to put it. Thank you. You stole the words
Right.
not out of my mouth because I
I
didn't
I
say
was
it,
just trying
but
to make sure I wasn't lost. I didn't mean to
no,
steal
no,
words.
definitely. Yeah, it's making it more deterministic, making it something that you can trust, and making it something that is actually reliable. Because right
Okay.
now, for us, reproducible and reliability, determinism in the system is based on really begging the model to try hard to do a good job, and that absolutely does not scale. So we're looking at different techniques to, for example, measure the ambiguity and requirements you give the system, to say, as you're building a design, how do we have high confidence that the implemented solution, when you sort of run the spec tasks, actually meet the requirements of the initial requirement list you generated? Those are all like non-trivial problems in and of themselves, but those are the areas we're investigating, making sure that we're not just saying it looks, saying it's better, but like it actually does lead to better software. Because ultimately, you probably don't want to care about the code in most cases, but you do care about the fact that whatever the LLM does is actually adhering to the invariants and the properties you provided at the start. That's super critical to us. And right now, we're begging and borrowing, but we're not, there's no Al Harris guarantee on that for sure. That's what we're working
Fair
towards.
enough. Well, yeah, and to me that sounds like there are things that LLMs are amazingly good at, and there are things that are inherently challenging with them. So trying to channel the things that they are good at and then help augment everything else, like that makes sense to me. Wonderful.
Making sure we're not using this hammer for every problem.
Yeah,
That's not a nail.
it's a good analogy. Well, Al, thank you so much for. I know you are busy all the time, so I appreciate you taking any time out of your day to talk with me and chat about all the things about spec-driven development.
No problem whatsoever. I'm super excited to be here, and thanks again for having me. It's been fun chatting.
It's been great. Thanks.